Yeah, we were just talking before we hit record. Just wanted to kind of hit on kind of a big moment that happened. Was it like a month ago? Has it
Just
been that
about
long?
yeah.
Yeah. So you had your first fight in the UFC, and you were going up. Guy was undefeated, right? And your very first fight after coming out of the Ultimate Fighter, and you came up against some adversity, like right off the bat, and I just wanted you to kind of describe what happened, and then we're going to get into where things went in your head and how the fight progressed from there.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, it was my
Yeah, it was my
first fight
fight.
after the Ultimate Fighter. There's a lot of ups and downs before the fight, but we finally got our opportunity, and honestly, we were very ready to compete. And the first round, I hurt my shoulder badly, badly, badly. It was a grade 5 AC break. It was a broken clavicle that was piercing through my muscles in my shoulder. It was a torn labrum, and it was a dislocated shoulder. And it was a complete freak accident. Um, my opponent just happened to grab me, and we both were airborne, and his weight and my weight both literally just landed in the perfect spot on the shoulder, and I just felt it explode. Uh, I knew immediately that it was a bad injury. It was a severely bad injury, and I was going to need to just stay composed. That was going to be the most important thing. It's going to be to stay composed. And beforehand, I kind of prepared for this already with Eric. We had a lot of visualization sessions, not just for this camp, but for prior camps. We had talked about uh, adversity with my opponent, and then adversity with myself. I've talked about, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but my pillars of truth. There's a few things that I know that I have. I know I have grit. I know that I won't give up. Um, and I never expected to pull that out in the first 30 seconds of round one. That was never something that I expected. But at that moment in time, it wasn't even like, oh man, I have to pull this out. It was like, okay, it's just time to switch gears. That was it. And then thankfully, I had the skills to back it up with the jujitsu that we had trained to do. So we were able to stay safe and still attack and put up a fight. Obviously, I wish I would have had more tools and I wish I could have done more. But with what we had, it was it was good. So it was a good place. It was a good fight, and I was proud of the performance. And Eric had just about everything to do with it. So I was very
Yeah.
grateful.
So just to recap, like you guys engage really, really quickly in the fight, and you land on your shoulder, and you basically destroy your shoulder through fractures, soft tissue damage. I mean, your left arm there was kind of useless. It was just along for the ride. Is
Yeah,
that a good assessment?
yeah.
So
I couldn't build. I couldn't grab. I mean, even most of my jujitsu game, I couldn't take back. I couldn't grab a guillotine. Like a lot of the things that I like to do, I couldn't do. It was literally I had to play for my back, and I tried to build, and I just couldn't. I just couldn't use that arm. So, yeah,
yeah,
it left me very compromised.
yep. And so you work with Eric. He's your mindset coach. And where at what point you land on your shoulder and you're like something's wrong, or you're like, oh God, this is awful. Like when did you kind of get over that hump of this hurts like hell, and this fight might be over right now? Or when did you say to yourself, I just got to keep going and figure this?
Immediately, I knew that I had to just keep going. I knew that I wasn't going to quit. I mean, it was
Yeah,
my UFC debut. He was going to have to kill me to get me out of there. But I didn't know how severely injured I was. At first feeling, I felt the shoulder just explode, and I was like, I wonder what I can do. And as I'm moving, like every second, every minute of the fight from there on out, I'm trying, especially that first round, I'm trying to see what I can do and what power I have in my left hand. And after the first 2 minutes, I understood that I just didn't have any real capability with that arm and that shoulder, and I knew that the pain was going to be consistent. And when I did have to like put any kind of pressure on it, it was severe pain. It was very, very bad pain. So I knew that at that moment in time, I knew that I had to just play a certain way. And I knew that I was going to have to deal with pain the whole time. Um,
Right.
Adrenaline or not, I knew that I was going to have to deal with pain. So
Right.
as soon as I accepted it, I think it was like, all right, we're just going to find a way to try to win and stay safe. And that was really it.
So go back to, you talk about working with Eric and, your pillars of truth and, you know, what was it within your work with him that kind of got you through that moment?
If you want to chime Eric in on this part, and just he's really the one that helped me organize these thoughts, and then I'll chime in after he kind of says what where he's coming from.
Yeah. So I guess first thing is like in talking about the grit, um, Carlos has had this for his whole life, right? Before we even started working together, he was already extremely gritty. Carlos has had fights where he's been injured before and he's continued fighting. He's had severe injuries in fight and he continued to fight and he won. So, like, Carlos, you want to talk about any of those past experiences that you've had in fights that helped you realize and have confidence in your grit? Because going into this fight, like you said, you weren't planning on having to lean on this skill, but you knew
Yeah.
you had it in the back pocket. So why did you know that you had it? What were some of your past moments that let you know that you were gritty?
Sure. As a kid, obviously, I've trained Taekwondo my whole life, and I've had moments where I have had, injuries. And so I knew innately that I was going to have just toughness. But it wasn't until my MMA debut where I understood that I had a little bit more grit. I broke my jaw in my second amateur fight. The guy broke my jaw, and I ended up going back. I didn't quit as well. I could taste the blood. I could feel my jaw slip. Um, I heard the crack, and I ended up knocking him out in the second round. Um, I broke my foot uh, in a fight, and as soon as it went numb, I could use my foot again to kick the guy, and again, I ended up like pushing through and winning that fight also. So those are little experiences that I knew that I had, and I didn't always have to bank on that, but I knew that I was tough. So as soon as when I understood that I could deal with a lot, when I saw a lot of my friends and a lot of other guys fight and quit, I was like, okay, I can. I know that I'm gritty. I know that I'm tough, but I also knew that it's not something that I wanted to bank on because that would kind of just not give me the longevity that I wanted in the career that I have. So, but it's a rough sport, and we know that we have to use it when necessary. But um, we had to talk about what my strengths were that I knew, and that is one of those strengths that we had to identify. We had kind of cookie jar moments that Eric calls, and it's kind of like moments that have really defined who I am as a person and my skill, etc. And I have those are just two cookie jar moments that I could really bank on and lean on, and where others might have quit, I knew that I wouldn't quit. So when this happened, it was almost in the back of it was never in the back of my mind to like, okay, you're gonna quit. No, it was like, okay, we're gonna find a way to get in there. Now I'm not saying that there weren't moments that there was one point in the fight where the guy took my back and took the choke, and there was a split second where it's like, well, if he chokes you out, he chokes you out. You're injured, and but immediately you snap out of it, and it's and I refuse. I refuse to go down like this. If anyone beats
Yeah, you're good.
You're good.
okay, if anyone beats me, it's going to be my opponent beating me and not myself beating myself. So that's kind of where I was. The my grit and my tenacity was definitely going to be one of my pillars of truth that I can bank on, and I don't even have to think about it. That's a pillar of truth for a reason. It's like this is already ingrained in me. I'm going to have this moment where I understand that I'm not going to quit, even if I'm injured. Brian Ortega had a similar shoulder injury, and
Yeah.
he didn't finish that fight. So again, I'm not saying I'm tougher than anybody else or this or that. This is just one of my truths that it's kind of a superpower. I believe in myself and being gritty. Again, I'm not going to bank on it. I feel like I have to build a whole bunch of things around it so it can amplify who I am. But it's definitely I would say, one of my fortes.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so, like, Carlos and I have been working together for a few years now. I think, 4 or 5 fights. And this is not something that we had to build. This was something that we worked on, like, uncovering and identifying and helping Carlos to realize that he has this skill already. He's had this for a long time. It's just sometimes as athletes, we forget about these things and we start to underestimate and undervalue some of our abilities and some of our strengths, right? And then we go into fights thinking like, man, can I really take punishment? Can I really keep going if it gets hard? Like what happens if he's really strong or if he hits really hard, or what happens if I get tired, or if I get an injury? Like, am I really going to be able to push through it? Well, when somebody like Carlos, who has the experience he has, like, he can go back and identify and look at these moments in his past where he has done this. He's already proven it to himself. He knows that he can do it. And it's just a matter of reminding himself of these things so that as he gets closer to the fight, he can have confidence in that ability and in that skill that he has. So, you know, and that's something I have to do a lot when I'm working with high level fighters and high level athletes like Carlos. It's not me necessarily teaching them all these things. They're already professional athletes. They already know a lot and they already have a lot of mental skills. It's more of just me helping them identify and understand and really give themselves credit for the skills that they have. And grit was definitely one of those for Carlos, where he's had it probably his whole life, and it's definitely useful in fighting.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like that's who you are, not what you are, right? I mean, that's like in your sinew and tissue is being tough and gritty. And um, we've talked a lot about on here about like identity foreclosure, where people, they identify themselves as the sport they play. And when I think of you, Carlos, I think of obviously you're a fighter, but I'll think of that moment where you just showed something that was who you are. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to here. Eric, talk about pillars of strength, and how you help your athletes identify those, and then help how you build on those too. Because obviously Carlos, in competition, it has to be, I think you used the word innate, Carlos, where you're just like, it was there. Like, you didn't have to think about being tough, and necessarily it just kind of happened. And, Eric, what's your strategy to get people to that point?
Yeah. So pillars of strength or pillars of truth, it's actually a term that, Carlos kind of came up with on his own, and essentially what it was is it came from an exercise that we did about identifying his personal strengths and what he feels like he really brings to the table. Some of this might involve some technical ability, some might involve some tactical ability, physical ability, and mental ability. And so it's kind of any of these areas, but these are the things that he brings to the table every time he fights, regardless of the opponent, regardless of the matchup, regardless of how good the camp was or how long it was. None of that stuff matters. He knows that he has these. They're, like you said, they're almost innate. They're baked into the fabric of his DNA. And when you have these things and you identify them, it gives you this greater sense of like security and confidence when you go into these situations, because every time you go into a competitive situation, there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of uncertainty. But these pillars of truth are certain. No matter what happens in the fight, no matter who he's fighting or what the matchup is, he knows that he has these pillars of truth. And I think that helps to just not worry so much about the uncertainty and to not get so caught up in that. It's more about focusing on, himself and, what he's able to do. And luckily for him, his pillars of truth are very strong and stable. And, he's built up this foundation that they can hold him, going into a situation like this, UFC debut against a tough guy, on a numbered card, big crowd, like all this stuff. That's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of unknown and uncertainty involved in that. But I think the pillars of truth were something that helped Carlos just kind of believe in himself and believe that he could go and walk into this space and be safe, right?
And if I can add to that, I think that this is something that it takes experience to understand what this is and what your pillars of truth are. And like Eric said, it's something that I had to just identify with time. We really had to like reflect and go over different experiences. And beforehand, uh, my thoughts were unorganized. So I would go into my fights. Sometimes I would have great performances. Sometimes I would have not so great performances, and I didn't understand why. Sometimes there was a lot of doubt. And I just wasn't aware of what my pillars of truth were, because sometimes your emotions play tricks on you. So one day you might feel very confident. The next day you might not feel very confident. Um, and that can blur what you think your truths are. But
Yeah.
if you have an understanding of what your truths, what you identify your truths to be, because of your past, because of past performances, because of how you grew up, because of your nurture, because of your nature, then you don't have to think about that, or you don't have to let those feelings that come and go affect your thoughts on what your truths are. So my truths going into a fight now no longer, no matter how I feel, because we are people. Sometimes we do feel more confident. Sometimes we feel less confident. Sometimes we feel more nervous. Sometimes we don't. No matter what those feelings are, those truths don't change. So that was kind of the exercises that we went through. It's like, hey man, don't forget, no matter what you do, no matter on your worst performance, on your worst day, these truths don't change. These are your truths. So that just gave me like a boost of confidence, of understanding, of just me understanding my identity, who I am as a fighter and as a person, because all of that kind of goes intertwined, right? I'm not just bringing skill in there, I'm bringing who I am as Carlos. And that's what my pillars of truth were. And that's how he helped me, I guess, organize my thoughts so that it could be a strength. And I didn't have to do a lot of guesswork as to who I am as a person or as a fighter. So that was really, really helpful.
Yeah, and it's just a step along the journey of self-discovery and self-awareness and self-knowledge, which as an athlete is super important that you know who you are. You know what I mean? Like you have to know who you are as a person, know who you are as a fighter. You've got to know what your strengths are. You have to know what your weaknesses are from a technical standpoint, a physical, mental standpoint. Like no one should be able to know who you are better than you, right? Especially in a sport like fighting where this is martial arts. Y'all are artists and you're expressing yourselves out there. Well, you can't express yourself if you don't know who you are. And this is a journey that a lot of professional fighters don't go on because they just don't understand the importance of it. But when you go on this journey, you start to learn more about yourself and understand yourself and learn how to work for yourself and have your mind be something that supports you instead of holds you back. And then you can really express yourself. And I think in order to get to your optimal performance and peak performance, you have to know who you are and know how to express who you are. And yeah, I think this exercise and understanding your pillars of truth and your strengths, it really helps along that journey.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Carlos, you brought up something in your last comment that it takes experience to understand. I mean, do you think that you would have had the same reaction, 10 years ago when you first started your career? Do you think, how do you think you would have handled it back then?
I think, like I said, there's some things that might be in no matter what form it came in. And I was very loose, but very sharp. I felt ready. I felt that kind of played a very big part in the fact that, oh, I got hurt. Okay, well, we're going to find another way to win. I wasn't beating myself before the fight. Now, I've had fights in the past where I beat myself up before the fight mentally. So when it comes time to performing, this injury might have gotten me knocked out. It might have not had me held up my end of my jujitsu or my frames or my movement. It might have I think I wouldn't have been as sharp, and I think it could have ended in a different way. Even though I don't believe I would have quit because of the injury, I don't believe I would have held the composure that I was able to hold in this last fight because people didn't even know I was injured. You have no idea how much I got backlash from the MMA community and the jiu-jitsu community because they thought I was just lazy. They didn't understand that I was hurt. Till today, I still get random DMs. They're like, "Hey, man, like you weren't even hurt. Like that just looked like a sprain." No, not quite. I was just composed. I was trying to do my best to be composed. I didn't want my opponent to know that I was hurt. And if he did know I was hurt, I didn't want him to know how badly I was hurt. And again, so I think with experience and with the training, I was able to perform the way I did. Again, much room to improve, obviously, but it helped me stay sharp, stay clear, and attempt to win the fight and stay safe, even with a big injury. So,
Yeah. So you talk about the clarity and the focus that you had pre-fight and just the mental space you were in. How did you deal with the pressure of making your UFC debut, being in this big environment with a big crowd, tough opponent? That's a lot of pressure to deal with. And, we see debuts happen all the time in the UFC, and the debut fighter normally struggles, to perform at their best. And it often gets kind of written off and understood by the viewers of like, oh, well, it's just his debut. Like, he's not expected to do that well because everybody understands the pressure is so high. And normally the circumstances for debut fighters are not ideal also, in terms of the camp and things like that. So how did you deal with all the pressure of this fight?
once again, I think it had to do a lot with the preparation that I had been doing for the last 2 years, 2.5 years with Eric. Um, every fight that we had, we knew was working towards the big stage. It wasn't like I was going to treat my next fight differently than I would treat my debut. Uh, my first fight that I fought with Eric, that I had him for camp, was my first fight for Fury, and we trained just as much for that fight as we train every other fight, including the debut. I just had to learn the concepts and understand a few things more than I did before, but um, so it wasn't anything new. I think a lot of it was just understanding that I had gone through it before. Again, it was the experience. It was a mix of the experience that I had had previously, and it was a mix of the confidence in my past performances and in the way that I train. I'm not lazy. I train a lot, so I have confidence in my training, in my preparation, in my teammates. I surround myself around high elite level athletes. So I understand that I'm at a certain level. Obviously, again, there's plenty of room to grow, and I plan on growing. But all of that played a big factor in me just being calm and comfortable. And honestly, I was so comfortable that when I got there and I saw everything and I saw the process, it just seemed like what is it? Just like smoke and mirrors. It just seemed like I saw the extra flash. I saw the interviews, but the cage was the same. The process was the same. I still had to be put in a hotel. I still had to, you know, go through the small press conferences or a big press conference. It was just a little bit of extra flash that I enjoyed. That it wasn't anything new. It wasn't my first time fighting, um, so I was able to really stay calm. And when I saw the cage, I was like, "Oh, I've been here. I've done this." So when it was time to warm up before the fight, I was very confident, very loose, and very ready. And again, I think it was just rest ingredients for a good performance or the best performance that I could give at the time. So I believe all of that played a big factor. So it is experience, but it's also consistent practice and dedication with what it is that you're doing. And you have to be mindful of what you're training. I can't just train the physical. I also have to train the strategic and I also have to train the mental. I have to train all of that. And since I've done that consistently, it was what they say luck is when opportunity meets preparation,
Yeah.
right? And it was just a good opportunity when I was just well prepared. So it wasn't anything out of my league.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that you're bringing up of like realizing that this is a fight. It might be different letters on your hat and on your gloves and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, it's 3 5-minute rounds against a professional fighter, and you're a professional fighter. It's no different than what you did fighting for Fury or fighting for any other promotion that you fought for. Everything else, like you said, is just smoke and mirrors, but so often athletes buy into that smoke and mirrors and they start building it up in their head. And when you build it up and you um, magnify the importance of the event, you start putting this pressure on your shoulders. So, yeah, I think that perspective that you were able to take and just reminding yourself, like, hey, this is the same shit I do every day. You know what I mean? Like, you go into the gym at 50-50 and you fight people every day. Like, it's no different whether you're doing it in the gym or you're doing it for Fury or you're doing it for the UFC or the Ultimate Fighter. At the end of the day, it's a fight, and you're going to go out there and try to do the best that you can, regardless of who's watching and how many people are there, any of that. So I think that's really important. And, I hear a lot of young fighters kind of falling into this trap, especially guys who are on the cusp of amateur and pro. And when they make that jump up to the pro, they start telling themselves, like, oh, now this is when it really matters. No, it's the same stuff that you've been doing, and you can't separate these things and make yourself feel like now it's important, because now you're just giving yourself more pressure, right? It's the same thing all the way through. I'm sure you wanted to win this fight just as bad as you wanted to win your amateur debut
Yeah.
fight, and you're a competitor, and your job is to go out there and compete, so I think that's really important. But throughout the fight week, like, what mental training technique or tool would you say was most effective for you throughout that week of dealing with everything?
We had gone through just morning mindfulness. That was a practice that Eric and I had spoken about. Because I got my phone call about 2.5, 3 weeks before the fight. Um, and we had just gone through a camp for December, and then after that fight kind of fell through, we were training, but we weren't expecting a call till potentially later, maybe February, maybe March, maybe later. And then all of a sudden we get the phone call and like, hey man, 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, you ready? And we're like, yeah, we're ready, we're not going to say no. But there were definitely, just like anybody, there's concerns. Self doubt comes about here and there. It's just natural for it to come out, even though you have your pillars of truth. But, you know, um, actually, Eric helped me with my mindfulness kind of mantra training that we did every day for the 3 weeks leading up to the fight. And every week we kind of focused on different things. But for example, the first week it was really me focusing on me being grounded, me being calm, understanding that I was ready, and it was just me sitting outside by myself and kind of reminding myself of this, and just clearing my head. So I almost like start my day with a base of thoughts, and that just, no matter where I go in the day, I can remember how I started my day, and it just continues that way for the rest of the day. It's work. You have to like actually do this every day for you to feel that way. Um, and it's discipline. And the next week, it was a little bit more on like you're excited to compete, your preparation. The following week was, hey, we're gonna go in there. We're gonna show this guy what we have. We're the predators. He's trapped in there with us. And we're just dialing it up little by little. But we're starting our day with a mindfulness training where we are just setting the tone for the rest of the day. And again, it's just us being aware of how are we going to set this tone, because your mind wants to play tricks on you throughout the day. You might start off the day well, but then in the middle of the day, those thoughts come in, a lady doubt. You start doubting yourself. What about this guy? Your opponent's strong too, and then all of a sudden, your mind can shift into a different direction. But if you start it off this way and be like, hey, no matter what, I will remind myself of this throughout the day. Whenever my thoughts go astray, I can always come back and remind myself of what I told myself in the morning. And that really helped me out, man. That really helped me get into the mindset that I needed to be every week. And then when it came time to fight week, it was just game time, man. It was me enjoying the process. I was done with all the doubt. I was done with everything. I was just gonna let the emotions come and go, and we were ready to just go in there and perform. And that was actually probably the most useful thing. And that was actually something semi new, not fully new, but we tweaked it a little bit for this 3-week camp that we had. Because everything else stayed the same. I mean, we never really stopped working. We work year long, year round. We might take a break here and there, but we work year round because I understand that in order for me to be good at this, I have to work year round. I have to work, I might take a few months off, but then we go back to it. I might do 1 day a week. When we get closer to the fight, I do 2 days a week. Sometimes we do 3 days a week. So it just depends, but it's consistent training. So the fact that we've been doing this consistently for so long, we were able to make small adjustments, and then I was doing my work in the background or as homework whenever me and him weren't talking for our meetings. So it was super important. And again, it just goes back to being disciplined and just using what you learn and making it part of your daily routine. That's it.
Yeah. And I think that morning mindset routine, that mindfulness routine is so crucial and can be so helpful, like leading into competition. And we're not talking about, 2-3 hours every morning. This is 30 minutes. It's not a lot of time that you're committing to this. But if you don't, you're just leaving it all up to chance. And who knows where your mind is going to be. And we're also not talking about once a week. If you only did this morning routine once a week, your mind probably wouldn't have been as on track as it was. So it's the consistency, like you said, the consistency and the discipline,
100%.
both on the big scale and on the small scale. And like you said, you did it every single day those 3 weeks leading up. And that's what it takes. It takes consistent practice, constant reinforcement, constantly feeding your mind what you want to be in there. And if you're not doing that, you just open it up to take anything, and our minds tend to go back to the default, which is negative. So we've got to be intentional and deliberate and mindful about intentionally feeding our mind what we want to grow. And for Carlos, he was able to do that every morning for 3 weeks leading up to the fight, and that has a big impact. But it's hard to do that. Most athletes aren't going to be disciplined enough to do that. They're not going to actually be that consistent. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're going to see the negative effects on your performance. So I think that consistency, like you said, is so big. And, for any athletes listening, this mental work is not something, it's not any kind of quick fix. There's no magic pixie dust. There's no secret formula. It's consistent work. It's no different than technical work. It's no different than, getting a black belt in jiu-jitsu. You can't get a black belt in jiu-jitsu going to class once a month. It's just not going to happen. So you can't master your mind and get your mind to work for you in competition if you only think about it and work on it once a month. It has to be consistent practice. And if you're unwilling to do that, then you're not going to have a mind that is fortified and is going to help you in competition. So it's really nothing secret. It's nothing special. It's just hard work. And Carlos has been willing to do that for as long as I've known him.
Yeah. So in essence, you kind of worked together so that Carlos had a spot to go in his brain, in his mind, so that when he did face adversity or when he was apprehensive about a situation, there was a place he could go, and like where he was confident in himself, and it created this outward. I don't know. I don't know. I'm struggling with how to like portray that. Maybe Carlos, you can help me. Like, you get to that spot in your brain, and then it projects out in a certain way. And obviously, it was you being gritty in that moment, but also like confident, pre-fight and that sort of thing, and accepting a loss as well. Like you showed grace in that situation where you were defeated, and I've known you about a year now, and you've worked your butt off and you've gotten yourself into good situations. But I imagine that this work is helping you cope with some adversity along the way.
As a athlete, loss is going to happen. And when I was an amateur and a beginner pro, I was just, I still hate to lose. Don't get me wrong. I hate to lose. But as an amateur and as a beginner pro, my any loss that I had was just, it negatively affected my life. It negatively affected the way that I saw myself, the way that I saw the sport, the internal monologue. It wasn't good. And because of my grittiness and my tenacity, I had something to prove to myself, and I would jump back on the bandwagon and do what I had to do, right? So it was never a full deterrent, but I didn't do it. It wasn't helpful to me. And I'm not saying that uh, this loss is beneficial. Maybe I'll say that this loss, um, I see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to see what I did good in moments that I didn't think I could handle. It was an opportunity to see also what I have to work on. Also, an opportunity to see what do I do if I get in this situation again? How would I handle this situation? You know, I also went through this whole 3 week fight camp. You know, I saw that I could do it in 3 weeks. I went through this routine of doing press, cutting weight, being in a big league show. There's just so much good that came out of this fight, win or loss, that, and I also didn't beat myself, which was a big thing. So I can see this as it was a loss, but I was defeated. It wasn't me defeating myself, therefore my opponent's also defeating myself. So I can live with that because he beat me. Good for him. You know, cheers to him. I hope to one day face him again. And were the circumstances great? No. But as a martial artist, as a fighter, I would rather be beaten than me beat myself and then also lose because I lost. You know, there are many fights where I beat myself up and I just still won. You know, so it's crazy. It's crazy that you actually have to kind of put yourself in this situation and accept the loss or the defeat. And like you said, take it with grace and learn from it and move on and have a better performance next time.
Yeah. And I think another big part of it is like being proactive and looking ahead to some of these things. Like Carlos said, we meet year round. It's not like we wait until after the fight and he's like, oh my God, I lost. What do I do? Like, no, we've prepared for all these kinds of situations. You know, we've talked about the worst case scenarios. We've talked about how you would handle adversity in a fight, how you would deal with defeat, how you would deal with injuries. Like, this is all stuff that you have to be proactive about, you know, and when you are proactive, it helps you to deal with those obstacles in real time as opposed to getting knocked off course by these obstacles and then having to like put the pieces back together and play catch up, right? So I think a lot of um, athletes, when they look at mental work and mindset training, they still have this medical model in their mind where they think, okay, I'll go seek help when I have an issue. But if I don't have an issue, I'm good to go. And we've got to give that model up and take this more like holistic approach and continuous work approach, just like you do with strength and conditioning. You know, like athletes work their body and they stay in shape because they know it's important, right? You should be doing the same thing with your mind. And Carlos has done a really good job of that. And because he's done that, it helps him to deal with anything that comes his way, the good, the bad, anything, because like we've taken the time to plan for these things and to like prepare, you know. So I think that's a big part, you know, that a lot of athletes don't do a good job of is just being proactive about this kind of work.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, this isn't a fight focused podcast, but I think that, the stuff that you guys do, um, it's like at the leading edge of how to prepare for competition and for life in general. So, I mean, obviously, this transcends um, beyond the fight game and what you do, Carlos. So, um, I think it's awesome. Like as even like a young athlete in high school is preparing, they have to apply the same principles that you guys have used here, for sure. Um,
Yeah, I got a question for Carlos about young athletes, because I know there are some that listen. What advice would you give to any young athletes that they could do to improve their mindset?
I think it's one, learn as much as you can about, first of all, yourself. You know, it's for a young athlete. If I had this knowledge beforehand, that I could kind of search into myself a little bit more, understand how I handle defeat. Why do I handle defeat? Because as a young kid, as a young adult, you know, as a young man, you just kind of go with the flow, how everything is going. You lose, you might get mad, you just live, right? But you don't really become mindful of what's happening and why it's happening. How did I act after I lost? How do I act after I won? Was I unstoppable? Do I become arrogant when I win? Do I stop training as hard when I win? Do I break down when I lose? You have to kind of learn who you are, learn about yourself, with how you train. Do I bank on my teammates more? Do the work for myself? Do I help my teammates? There's stuff that you have to learn about yourself first. Once you know yourself a little bit better, you can kind of foresee how you're going to handle a victory and a loss. And that's something that I didn't necessarily have. I knew some innate things about myself, but I didn't really take time to step outside the box and see myself from a bird's eye view, and how I acted and how I perceive losses and wins. So that's something that's really important. Obviously, seeking help, having a sports psychologist, um, or just a mindset coach. There's exercises, there's points of views, there's just knowledge to be learned. And I think the big thing is getting into that space where you want to learn more about that, and then using this as consistent work as well. I think wrestlers go on and become such great MMA fighters because they're in such a consistent competitive sport that they do actually have to really find out who they are.
Yeah.
And they don't not only go through it in a physical way, but it's so mindfully taxing, just because you have to cut the weight. You're competing, basically with being malnutrition. You have no good water base, you're not hydrated, it's just so gritty. And they really have to kind of hold on tight to what makes them feel powerful and strong when they're physically actually not that powerful and strong at the moment of competition potentially. So I think it's just, like we said, being mindful. This is very new to me, and I've taken it to heart because it is very new to me. And when I realized how much being mindful has really helped me for the better, not only as an athlete but as a person, um, man, I can only just speak to that. Speak to the ability to just sit in an empty room and just see where your thoughts go, clear your thoughts. Be able to breathe, be able to feel where you're. Are you inclined to be a more positive ended person or negative minded person? And we can always switch things up. Your mind is a powerful tool, man. So obviously, if they're a good athlete, they're going to listen to coach, they're going to do the homework, they should be anyway, they're going to do all of that, but they kind of put the mindful training to the side. And some people do it naturally well. Some people don't. Some people might have, especially with people with good performances, bad performances, that's when you can tell that. And I don't mean like good or bad in skill, but like maybe their mind wasn't in it one day and maybe their mind was in it another day. Um, those are the unique signs of like, man, this kid.
Hmm. Okay. I want to ask you kind of like zooming out now and looking at your overall journey. You started Taekwondo as a kid. You did it for a long time. You had your amateur debut in MMA in 2011. Made your pro debut in MMA in 2014. So 10 years you've been a pro MMA fighter. It took you 10 years to finally get to the stage that you're on now, fighting in the UFC. I talk to a lot of amateur fighters who have this idea in their head that they're going to go pro, they're going to fight 4 times the first year, they're going to go 4-0, and then they're going to be on Dana White Contender Series, and they're going to be in the UFC. I think a lot of fighters have this misconception that this is an easy journey and it's a quick journey to get to the level that you're at. Can you talk a little bit about the journey, the last 10 years, and what's allowed you to keep going? Because I'm sure there were a lot of moments throughout this process. 10 years is a long time. I'm sure there's a lot of moments throughout it where you were just thinking, man, screw this, man. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm going to go get a job where I can get paid. I don't have to fight. I don't have to put my body through this. Like, what have the last 10 years been like? How have you been able to keep going? And yeah, just give us kind of what it's like, the reality of of what it means to be a professional fighter trying to get into the UFC. Yeah. So like that grit, coming back again to that grit, over 10 years, you had to lean on that grit time and time again. And like you said, a lot of fighters that they weren't as gritty as you. And if you don't have grit, if you don't have the ability to be resilient, it's going to be really hard to make it all the way to the UFC and to one of these top promotions. So I think that grit again is coming back. And, I think we're really just illustrating how important it is for athletes to have that grit. If they want to have, an extended career and to be able to do this for a long time, to be able to make money in sport. The other thing you mentioned was the growth and being open-minded, being willing to grow. And part of that goes back to self-awareness and self-knowledge, knowing what you need to grow on. I want to ask you about growing on the mindset. Like what brought you to wanting to work on your mindset? Because this is an area that a lot of athletes can grow in, but most won't actually take that step to start that process. So what was the driving force behind you starting that process? Yeah. And like the stars aligned on that day, and Carlos and I met and haven't looked back since. But for athletes and coaches, I think like if you like you don't have to wait until you have an issue. Again, going back to being proactive, you don't have to wait until you just blew the season in the last game or you had terrible underperformance. You can start now because this is stuff that's going to help you throughout the rest of your career. And like Carlos said, in life as well, like all of these skills are transferable. They're sport focused, but you can take it and copy and paste it to other areas of your life. You know, performing in a game, and the pressures that come along with that may be very similar to proposing to your fiance, and if you want to have those abilities to do the same thing, like you can practice it in this context, but you can then go take it and apply it to your relationships, to your career, to your life, to your family, so many different areas. And so I think there's just so much benefit that you can get out of this kind of work, and you don't have to wait until you have a problem. You can start right now. Yes. Oh yeah. Appreciate it, Carlos.
Thanks, Carlos. All right,
Yep.
man. Have a good one. See ya.